Let's get some thoughts now from Chris Wallace, and his guest, the host of Fox News Sunday, is joined by Fox News contributor Karl Rove. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Brett. Well, one of the things I've learned from covering a series of primaries and now the conventions with Karl Rove is he just thinks differently than everybody else. He makes lists, he makes numbers, he quantifies things. So give me your breakdown on the speech.
There were 67 paragraphs in the speech. 19 of them were devoted to kitchen table issues, jobs, health care, education. 11 of them were devoted to his personal story and biography, 8 to foreign policy, 6 to being a maverick reformer, 6 to being emphasis on bipartisanship, 6 were devoted to Obama, with one of them lauding him and 5 contrasting with him. 3 were devoted to Palin and 8 to everything else, saying hello, goodbye, and thanks.
Well, so besides the fact that you have demonstrated that you're a stat freak, what does that prove?
I think it was the right emphasis to spend much of the speech talking about kitchen table issues, because he needs to show that he's connecting with the problems. Even when he was talking, for example, about Palin, he was trying to connect with kitchen table issues, talking about how she knew about paying a mortgage and running a small business and worrying about paying for groceries and gasoline. So he was trying to say to the American people tonight, look, I know you see me as a commander-in-chief, but you also can see me as somebody who is empathetic about the problems you talk about around the kitchen table, and I want to work on them.
I want to talk about his assertive effort to try to separate himself from the current Republican Party. He had one line about the president, and he didn't even mention him by name, and then he had a very powerful paragraph about the Republican Party, and quite frankly, the Republican delegates didn't seem to like it much, where he said, we have lost our way, we have lost the trust of the American people by what we've done in Washington, and I'm going to change the way things are by getting back to basics.
Yeah.
Good idea or not?
It is, because look, we lost in 2006 because people looked at us and saw a group of people who had become personally corrupt, Mark Foley and others who had personal scandals, and also people who had lost our way with earmarks. And he clearly has taken on in his campaign earmarks, and tonight set a very strong marker that he wanted a Republican Party that returned to its record of honesty and credibility, and the congressional Republicans in particular have moved away from that.
Now let's talk about the stagecraft. Up in the booth, they were talking about the fact that it was green backdrop behind him. It was a big lawn in front of a big house. You thought, what the heck is that? It looked like it could have been one of the McCain mansions.
Well, I think it was a Tri-Delta sorority house out at Stanford with people walking in and out of it.
Why are you so familiar with a sorority house?
No. Maybe it's the mansion of Collis P. Huntington, founder of the Southern Pacific.
But in any case,
that was weird.
On stagecraft and on his delivery, what would you say?
Look, on delivery, it was the best speech he has given on a teleprompter, but it wasn't all that great because he's uncomfortable in this venue. This is not his venue. His venue is free-flowing, microphone in hand, wandering through the crowd, taking all comers, town hall meeting. It's not a set-piece speech like this. And particularly at the beginning, they looked to be searching for the bright backdrop. That green was reminiscent of New Orleans with that terrible speech he had in New Orleans earlier this year. And it took him a while to get to a blue background. But even then, it's an awkward way for him to go. And it was a workmanlike speech, but it wasn't what we saw last night.
Karl Rove, it's always a pleasure to be with you. I've enjoyed this ride through the primaries of the conventions. Let's keep it up right till election day.
Absolutely.
And Britt, I bet you didn't know there were 67 paragraphs in that speech.
No, but we did find out one other thing that might interest you, Chris. You could pass this on to Karl, as we got curious about that green backdrop. And as you said, it looked like the lawn in front of a house. It was, in fact, the lawn in front of a school. It was the lawn in front of Walter Reed, I believe, Junior High School, which turns out to be located in Arizona, you would think, right? Wrong. North Hollywood, California. Go figure. Well, that was the end of John McCain's account of his terrible ordeal as a prisoner of war, and his explanation of the effect that he said it had on him, changing him from a man devoted entirely to himself to a man he said so grateful for and so devoted to his country. Let's go back to Chris Wallace. By the way, the convention is now adjourned. There's still noise and music down there, but the convention is officially over. So let's go down to Chris and his guest, who is former Hillary Clinton communications director and now Fox News contributor, Howard Wolfson. Chris?
Brett, thanks so much. Howard, when we talked last night as a Democratic strategist, you were in the extremely uncomfortable position of having almost nothing critical to say about Sarah Palin. I assume that's not going to be a problem tonight.
That is not going to be a problem tonight. The speech had some nice moments, especially as Britt was saying at the end about his imprisonment, but overall he failed at his central task. He needed to tell those independents who are tired of George Bush, who think that the Bush presidency has failed, what he specifically would do differently as president from George Bush. He didn't do a bit of it. George Bush was mentioned once in this speech. He was the elephant in the room who was never talked about. And I think if you're an independent at home and you think this country needs to go in a new direction, you did not hear anything about that from John McCain.
Howard, he did, look, he's not going to trash George Bush at a Republican convention, but he did trash, to some degree, the Republican Party at a Republican convention. He said this is a party that has lost its way, lost the trust of the American people. We're going to change that. I mean, that's pretty tough.
It is, but
and it's more in standing up to his party than Barack Obama does to the Democrats.
Look, I agree he had a tough task. I mean, he starts this election in a hole. George Bush is the least popular president we've had since World War II. It's a difficult position to be in, but he needed to come into this room and speak over the heads of this crowd to the American audience who are tired of George Bush, and they want to know, what specifically are you going to do different? Not just what are you going to do, but what are you going to do differently than George Bush has done? And he didn't do it.
Well, he did lay out contrast between himself and Barack Obama, and not to say that there were tremendously new ideas. It was the basic liberal, conservative, Democratic, Republican contrast, but those are contrasts that a lot of people think most Americans still believe in if it is a center-right country. Isn't that enough? On taxes, on spending, on trade, on national security.
Well, first of all, I don't think this is a center-right election. I think this country has moved to the left as a result of George Bush. I think, if anything, it's a center-left election. Look, I thought the contrasts were appropriate. I don't think he went over the line. I think there were parts of the speech that were moving. But if you're at home and you want to know, what is he going to do differently, he didn't tell you.
Well, he talked a great deal about change and how he's going to change things. He also talked, as has been mentioned before by the panel, he used the word fight and fight for you 2-3 dozen times.
Right. Sounded a little bit like the Hillary Clinton speech. Hillary Clinton used to use that word fight an awful lot.
It worked for her for a while.
And, you know, he's trying to make an implicit contrast there, obviously, with Obama, trying to play off the notion that Obama isn't tough enough, isn't enough of a fighter. First of all, I think Barack Obama has proven himself to be plenty of a fighter. But that wasn't his central task in the speech. His central task wasn't to rally the base here. The base has been rallied by Sarah Palin. He needed to talk to independents, and I just don't think he did it.
Howard Wilson, who seems to be in a much more comfortable and fighting mood tonight.
Indeed.